Welcome everybody. So I wanted to record a video to talk about the benefit of regular practice. Now, that may sound pretty obvious, but what I've noticed in the last few weeks is that a number of students and people that I've been working with have been using certain yogic technique in what I would call triage situations. Now, let's just give a scenario. So let's say that you are feeling stressed, you're feeling anxious, not necessarily all of the time, but there is a situation that has arisen in your day. Maybe you're rushing to get somewhere. Maybe you've had a bad phone call with a client or with a friend or with a partner, whatever it might be, a bad interaction or a challenging interaction. Maybe you've just got a lot on your plate and generally you're just feeling, stressed and anxious, and like there's a lot of thoughts going on in your mind, and there's a lot of credence and there's a lot of talk these days that says, okay, right, well, and even yoga would agree with this, if you like, that in those situations it's very handy to do some, let's just say, some long slow breathing, or one of the many techniques that are available today that we can find on the internet or through the teachings and so on. Essentially the sensible idea that in the moment when we're feeling stressed, we can notice that, for example, our breath has become fast, that our breath has become shallow, that the breath has become very much in the chest rather than anywhere else. And that also maybe that our body has become tense and we're carrying that tension maybe in our hands or in our jaw or in our forehead, in our brow, for example. And so the idea is that, the sensible idea is that in those moments we can utilize a breathing practice, bring our mind into connection with the breath, do all the things that we know we're supposed to do, and through that, perhaps with some counting or perhaps like repeating a comforting phrase or an affirmation of peace or whatever it might be, we can help to shift our state from that heightened state of stress or anxiety and all of the physiological factors that accompany that. High blood pressure, a faster heart rate, the release of certain hormones and chemicals into our system. And we can down-regulate that response so that our body becomes a bit calmer, our heart rate goes down, our blood pressure settles, and the tension on our body also sort of melts away to a certain degree. Now, there's nothing wrong with that at all, and in fact, that's definitely beneficial. However, hearing people talk about these techniques and this way of sort of dealing with the stress that arises in life head on in an acute situation made me realize that it might also be useful to explain why that and that alone is not necessarily what yoga is prescribing to us in terms of moving towards and transforming our mind towards a place that is more deeply peaceful and a place where the opportunity to be entangled in the stress response diminishes over time. And this is where regular practice comes in. So the analogy that I often like to give, and I'm sure many other people use the same one, is that if I want to go and play football at a very high level, probably the last place that I want to learn how to play football is on the pitch on a Saturday afternoon, surrounded by my team and the opposition team. If someone then said, okay, right, now I'm going to train you how to dribble or how to take a corner or how to kick the ball or how to stop the ball or control the ball in that environment, which is a fast-paced, pressured environment, I don't think you see many people teaching or being taught football or any activity in that way, right? So the idea is that you train and you practice in the background, perhaps on your own in smaller groups, in an appropriate context and in an appropriate environment, so that when the match day comes or the peak moment arrives, we have built into our mental patterning, subconscious, conscious patterning, and into our body as well, physiologically, a trained mechanism or way of being in that situation regarding the activity that we're doing. So what that means to say is that, for example, if you're a striker in a football match, you just build instinctually this ability to know, right, I'm going to go and grab the ball and I'm going to shoot and hopefully I'm going to score. I'm going to end the football analogy here because I'm not the biggest football fan anyway, but hopefully you can see why I'm using it. So the point is that we train ourselves so that we're ready for that moment. Now, we can take that analogy into yoga. Now, if, for example, we get very, very stressed, and that results in us maybe shouting at people or saying things that we don't really mean, things that can cause harm to others and to ourselves, or we just find ourselves not really being able to deal with things in a way that we might hope we could. One of the biggest challenges is even recognizing until it's too late that we've got into that state in the first place. So if there's no awareness of the chain of events that arise within us from the manifestation of a thought that says, I'm not happy in this situation, for that then to be repeated, for it then to become slightly more frustrated, for it then to become like anger, for it then to pour out in the body, for us to start feeling the sensations, for those sensations to arise, the tensions to arise, and then suddenly we're dealing with a volcano, and the volcano explodes. So part of the practice of, let's say, a breathing practice or a mindfulness practice, meditation practice, is to begin by becoming aware of our state, to be aware of how the breath feels, to be aware of how the body feels in terms of its sensations, and also to notice how the mind feels. Now, in order to actually deepen the practice of awareness, it takes time, and that's why it's called a practice. At first, for example, you might guide students to try and feel some sensations in their heart space or in certain parts of their body. And a lot of the time, people really don't feel anything. And that's not because there's nothing to feel, but it's because they haven't practiced the concentration and developing the more subtle levels of awareness that are required to come into connection with those sensations. And so part of practicing on a regular basis, even before we get to doing any breathing or actually doing anything per se, is training this practice of, let me become aware of myself, what is going on within me at this moment. When you combine that practice of awareness with some kind of calming or relaxing practice like long exhale breathing, or even shorter but kind of regular, what's called samavriti, equal inhale, equal exhale with pauses, that then actually takes you to a relatively calmer state. I'm not saying it takes you all the way to calm or all the way to peace or all the way to shanti, but it will take you from point A, which is a more up feeling of feeling slightly heightened and stressed and kind of stress response, to a slightly more down regulated state of just being a little bit calmer, a little bit slower. Once we begin to practice moving into that state more and more often, not only do we become more adept at guiding ourselves into a calmer state, and we create patterns in the mind that are more able to sustain that calmness over a period of time, but we also begin to, through regularly relating to that calmer state, we begin to notice the sensory feedback that accompanies a calm state in terms of mind, body and breath. And we can also perhaps begin to notice when we've been drawn away from that state, in the sense that we are upregulated. I'm not sure if that is exactly the right phrase, but where we are in a state where we're stressed and where there is no regulation actually, and we're just kind of about to explode. So through a regular practice, we suddenly begin to gain the benefit, if you like, of that awareness of how do I feel from the perspective of sensation, And are these sensations starting to sort of raise red flags to say, hang on, you need to start paying attention to or being aware of this sensory state, because if you don't pay attention now, you're going to erupt and you're going to end up somewhere that's going to be harmful for yourself and harmful for others. So the first point that's important is that by practicing just awareness that leads into, let's say, a breathing practice, and doing that on a regular basis, we get to notice when we're being triggered at a much, much earlier stage. Now, we can go into that in a huge amount of additional detail, but I just want to make that sort of basic point in a nutshell. And then, of course, the other part of it is the practice of breathing itself. What we notice, and what I find often when teaching breath practices, is that, for example, if you give someone the instruction or the suggestion, okay, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out, what they typically do is this. Now, what you'd have seen there, I exaggerated to make a point, was that, you know, my neck is tensing, my shoulders are lifting, my chest is going up, my body's moving, my face is kind of making almost like a comic sort of movement, and then as I breathe out, kind of letting go. Now, this is not actually what we want to cultivate over time. This is a breath that has too much effort. If you think about the actual basic level of breathing in a calm way that sustains us when we're not even thinking about it, that's kind of going on in the background in a calm way that you might barely notice that the body's moving. So the idea is not that we want to take sort of vigorous inhales and vigorous exhales, but for a lot of us we need to actually come to a place of understanding and learning of, how do I let go of this effort that somehow seems to have crept into my breath, and this tension and holding in different parts of the body based on the person that is restricting my ability to cultivate a calming, soothing and parasympathetic nervous system stimulating breath. And that takes practice. So again, the breath that we might think is calming, that we bring into battle in that moment where we're in an acute situation of stress, may not actually be the most optimum breath that can bring us down and can down-regulate our nervous system to bring us back to a calmer state. So therefore, again, from a physiological perspective, we need to practice and begin the journey of working with our body to know, for me, what is a calm breath and what does that feel like, and what parts of the body are engaged and which parts of the body are not, and how much effort am I putting into this so that I can come to the most physiologically balanced and calming breath that I know how. And we can't do that in the heat of battle. We have to do that before the battle arrives in practice. And then the final point to make is really the point that comes from the mind. And this point is really to do with the fact that, again, as stated in the Yoga Sutras in many places, generally speaking, our minds are scattered and many pointed. What that means is that they're constantly moving from one thing to another. Very, very hard for us not to be distracted. Very, very hard for us to maintain concentration for any significant period of time on one activity. And so practicing bringing the mind into the breath, which is another component of a breath practice. It's not that we're going to take these slow, deep breaths and we're going to be thinking about what we're eating for lunch. It's not that we're going to take these slow, deep breaths and we're going to be thinking about what we're doing next after this activity. The idea is that we want to unify, bring into yoga, into union, which is one of the meanings of the word yoga, the breath and the mind. And of course the body, but we'll just talk about the breath and the mind. So in practicing, what we do is whenever the mind begins to wander to a distracting thought, we attempt gently to bring the mind back into the sensation of the breath. And in doing so, what we do is we train a one-pointedness, or what we might call an ability to voluntarily rest our mind in a place that we choose, of our choosing, rather than letting it be distracted. But the flip side of that equation is that by bringing the mind back into the breath, which has the potential to be a calming and soothing space and a restful space, we let go of whatever is causing our mind to fluctuate, what is causing our mind to be entangled, and therefore is causing this flush of stress-related symptoms in our body, in our breath, and in our mind. So through practice, again, we begin to be able to tie the mind more fully and more deeply to the breath, and not only create a pattern of calmness and steadiness in the mind, but we also take the mind away from the things that cause us stress. And then hopefully what happens is, over time, once we practice that for a few minutes, perhaps in the battle, when we come back to it, we are in a calmer state to maybe pick up that content of the mind again and to deal with it in a more reflective and responsive way, compassionate way, rather than perhaps a reactive and perhaps unmeaningly aggressive way, which causes problems for ourselves and problems for others. So this is one of the reasons why, yes, it's great to be able to do some breathing when you're stressed. But ideally, if we're looking at this from the perspective of yoga, we want to practice this on a regular basis so that each and every day we bring ourselves back down into a calm state. We learn how to physiologically breathe in a smooth and easy way that is beneficial both to our mind and our body. And we also train the mind through the meditative aspect of bringing the mind into the breath to let go of the things that it has become entangled with. So this is the reason why, not just myself, but many teachers and many of the ancient texts, and certainly Sri Krishnamacharya, always recommend a regular and sustained practice. Then when we need to call on our practice in the times when life is tough, which is many, many times on many occasions, we can lean back into our practice and draw something out that becomes instinctual and can help to bring us down to calmness, or a nearer state of calm than we might have been without the practice and without the technique. So let us reflect on this and see if we can use this as a way of stimulating our motivation to practice on a regular basis. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Namaste.